So we're at the end of our series on the Ten Commandments. We're also thinking about All Saints' Day, and it feels like in our culture we do need Sabbath, doesn't it? I mean, it does feel like Sabbath is an important thing, and Sabbath originally meant that beginning on Friday evening through for the Jewish community on Friday evening through Saturday evening. And then Sunday, of course, was not part of the Sabbath. But for us, for the Christian church, we adopted Sunday. And, of course, now with Cowboys playing in 2 hours and football games and baseball games and soccer games and whatnot being played on Sundays as well. I mean, it's all up for grabs. But there does seem to be this need for Sabbath. And I hesitate to, I think being here is such a significant and important thing to do in the sense that it is also, for me, worship is also, as I've mentioned before, it's rehearsal, it's practice, it's kind of centering ourselves and orienting ourselves with God, but in community with one another, and practicing what that means to be in community in the world. So it's important, and yet I look out and I'm glad to see a lot of folks just dressed casually because, I hate for us to have to get all busy getting ready and all dressed up and hair and everything, and it's just more work, and sometimes we'll wake up and go, I don't really want to do that today, I'm staying home. And I'd love for you just to come in your pajamas, your shorts, throw your flip-flops on. I mean, maybe I need to start doing that, except for my legs. I don't want anybody looking at my legs. But other than that, maybe I just need to start coming as casual as possible so that you start feeling that way. Although, as I walked around with a tie today, I thought, feels kind of nice, just for me, because I never wear a tie. So I thought, I'm going to set it apart a little bit. But have you noticed, with our culture, which is so tech-heavy now, right? It's so tech-saturated, and we all have smartphones, or most of us have smartphones, and it's very easy to get connected to that. I thought about even giving everybody just a moment, any of you who are interested in this kind of thing. Every now and then I do notice a couple of our band members, as I get home, I'm looking down and I see 11:15, 11:30, 11:45, someone would have tweeted something from the band, and I'm thinking, how did you do that, during this thing? And so I just wanted to give everybody a chance, if you wanted to get on your phone right now, very quick, you can take and get on there and tweet. And I'm at 11:11, First United Methodist Church. Great music. Preacher about to start. This is going to take a while. Hashtag snap. So I started looking at all these things. You've seen these things too. I bought online. I succumbed to the pressure. I wanted to have a chance to sort of get a little more centered, right? I've been wanting that forever. So about 6 months ago, I bought this pack of cards, this deck of cards called Mindfulness on the Go. And it's a beautiful deck of cards, but I hadn't opened it until about a couple of days ago because it just bothered me. It sounds fascinating because I am busy. We're all busy. And I thought, well, yeah, if we could just have a little mindfulness on the go. But then it started sounding like paying attention while you're not. It's kind of what it started feeling like. And so I just didn't want to open it up. And then I started noticing we have all these other things, and I've got them at home too. Maybe you have them. Yoga for those who don't have time for yoga. How to be happy all the time in just 3 minutes a day. That's another great book. The 1 Minute Manager. Some of y'all might have seen that one. The 10-minute workout. I even saw one that says just 3 minutes a day exercise and will change your life. And I'm thinking, really? How to get more out of a faster, shorter walk. I like that one. My favorite one I came across the other day, like 3 days ago, I saw this one. The 10-minute Bible hour. Now, I just looked at it because I was trying to figure out, how did this guy figure out how to transcend time? How to just transcend time and space. I don't like the content at all, but the idea of the 10-minute hour, I think that's interesting. So what is it about Sabbath? Sabbath has been a part of culture for generations, for centuries and centuries. It's been a part of religious culture for the Judeo-Christian faith. In the Jewish background, the Sabbath was very much a part of regulating commerce in a sense, as well as in connecting people back with God, at least once a week. Of course, the creation story was a big impetus for that understanding as God created in 6 days and then on the seventh day rested, which I think is always a limited way of seeing it, because I'm always more interested in what did God do on the eighth day? On the eighth day of creation, what happens? But Sabbath became an important part of identifying culture, Christian culture, Jewish culture in particular, and setting it apart from the rest of culture, which was very much oriented around power and oriented around acquisition and imperialism. And so this was a way of setting life apart from that reality. And it continues to be an option for that. Walter Brueggemann, who wrote a great book called Sabbath as Resistance, a very small little book that he published 2 years ago. In it, he says, Sabbath, if for no other reason, is important because it reminds us that we are set apart from a world that is rooted in consumerism, in destruction, in oppression, and injustice. In fact, if you look at our text, and if you look at Jesus' life, what got him in so much trouble was that he began to resist Sabbath because it had become an institutional practice of power and not a chance or an opportunity for building community or for attending to one another. And so he healed on the Sabbath. He taught on the Sabbath. He invited those who typically weren't welcome into the temple area on the Sabbath. He continued to resist and to transform and reframe what the Sabbath was intended. And his famous line, people were not created for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath was created for people. So how do we practice it today in a culture that is saturated with consumerism? In a culture that's really oriented, as Martin Marty wrote a book recently that I haven't read yet, but it's on my desk, The Market as God. Because market has become the primary motivation for life. It's become the primary impetus for all that we do. How do we begin to explore Sabbath as a part of that? As resistance even. Now, I'm all for rest. I need a lot of it. I don't get near enough. How many of you woke up this morning an hour early? How many? I woke up 4 hours early. I was so anxious about waking up early, I woke up earlier. I looked up and it was 4 o'clock in the morning. It was actually 5 o'clock, but it was 4 o'clock because I hadn't turned my clock back yet. So I mean, I woke up early and I'm sitting there trying to figure out what time it was, and I was up for an hour and a half, finally fell asleep again. But I love rest. Rest is important. And science says it. You need rest. You need so many hours a day of rest. You need rest during the week. We have a culture that spends 50, 60 hours a week. That's a pretty good average work week for a lot of people. In Europe, they average about 35 hours a work week. So we have an orientation around production and busyness, and we're even busy with our busyness, and we're not always sure why. And yet we live in this kind of reality. There's a wonderful writer, a social psychologist by the name of Ellen Langer. Do you know that name? I thought you might. And Todd here is a social psychologist and teaches at college, and I thought maybe you know her name. Fascinating author. She was coming up with studies that talked about mindfulness before mindfulness was a thing. Now mindfulness is everywhere. Mindfulness on the job, mindfulness at work, mindfulness in prayer. We talk about being present in here and being mindful. And it occurred to me after listening and watching one of her TED Talks and then listening to some of her interviews and reading one of her books, it occurred to me, we really don't know what mindfulness is. We act like mindfulness is sort of a restful presence, but the reality is you can't be present. You can't be present because present is not here. It's gone. It's come, it's gone, it's come, it's gone. Instead, what happens is we end up living most of our lives, according to Ellen Langer, we live most of our lives in a state of mindlessness. Now, that's a little bit difficult to swallow. But we have this reality that we live kind of without really thinking about what we're doing. We don't spend a lot of time reflecting on what we're doing, or reflecting on our encounter, or reflecting how we're about to approach a moment, or reflecting on why we do the same thing over and over, like Paul the Apostle, who echoes so much of our own human nature when he said in the New Testament, I think it was in Romans, when he said, why is it that I don't do what I ought to do, and I'm always doing what I ought not do? I can't get it straight. Well, it's because we're mindless. Most of us live in a mindless state. Most of our culture exists in a mindless state. All you have to do is just listen to the news. And I'm not saying the news is an imbecilic kind of thing. What I'm saying is the news never questions itself. And those who are being interviewed never question themselves. They approach everything from the standpoint of a market. How do I present the best image? How do I present the best take on this or the best spin? We're just a mindless, largely mindless society. So when somebody says something about, yeah, I think there's white supremacy, I think that white supremacy is a real issue in our culture today. I think it's a real problem. There are other people who suddenly just repel immediately from that. And then there are people who jump right on that bandwagon as quickly as possible. The Me Too movement that's going on, because there is this swell of women coming out about having experienced sexual harassment. And then there's this swell of men who are confessing in general for being men. And I'm not denying any of that. But we approach it mindlessly. Ellen Langer says most of the reason why we have problems in our society, why we have repetitious patterns that continue on and on and on, is because most of us live mindlessly. We operate out of echo chambers. We operate out of affiliative groups that sort of share the same thinking that we have. We operate, because our brain is designed to, we operate out of past behavior and past interpretation and understanding. It's so hard to approach something new. Sabbath is about approaching something new. Sabbath is about mindfulness. Now, here's what Ellen says about this. It was interesting. She did these experiments, and you might remember these, and you can even help me if I forget a few details. But she did this one great experiment where she took two groups, and she told them, she said, now, one of you, both groups, you're going to be reading jokes. That's your job. That's all you got to do, is you're just got to be reading jokes and reading comics and stuff. So one group, she set aside and said, we're going to pay you to read these jokes. And the other group was just told they're just going to read jokes. Well, guess what happened? The group that was reading jokes for pay, after a while, wanted more money. They started thinking the jokes weren't funny enough. They started wanting more money for the jokes and more jokes. The group that was reading jokes just for the fun of it was having a great time. And they were just having fun playing with jokes. She did several studies like this where she worked with chambermaids who were busy moving about doing their job, and they spent a lot of time. This was a study done in England, and they were walking and taking care of household chores and moving all about the place, but complaining that they never had time to exercise. She simply told them to see their work as exercise. And they began to lose weight, to find more energy, to have more fun at their job. She took 80-year-olds and she inserted them into a retreat facility and said, now this program we're going to introduce to you is an amazing program that actually, if you'll participate, and it's a lot of fun, you will actually start to feel younger. In fact, you'll look younger. This was when 80 was 80, right? Now 80 is the new 60, right? So, but this was back about 25, 30 years ago. Guess what happened? Of course, they started feeling more vital. They started feeling younger. But the odd thing is that when people came and visited them during that, just random people that were part of the experiment, they actually perceived this group of men to be 15 to 20 years younger than they were. You're saying, nah. Or maybe you're saying placebo. It's just a placebo. And this is what's interesting. Ellen says this. She said, where did it come? Where did we get to this place where we talk about placebo effect as being a negative thing? It's our body's unique drug. It's our body's pharmacology. She said, change the language you associate with something, and you begin to change the way you see that something. She said that mindfulness is not meditating. She said, in fact, meditating is getting ready for mindfulness. Mindfulness is learning to notice stuff. And noticing requires that you stop and that you ask questions. You look at somebody and you think they're an impulsive, hyperactive kind of person, and you see that as a negative. But if you see it from their perspective, if you begin to ask what is going on for them and what's not going on for them, you begin to see they can see what they're doing as spontaneous. Everything is new. I'm ready for the next thing. Seeing a person as inattentive or spontaneous are two completely different ways of seeing a person. She says mindfulness is our way of engaging with life in a way that transforms life because we care to take note. My Aunt Ninny, I've told you about my Aunt Ninny, and I want to close with a thought, but I want to tell this story to help me get there. And I'm going to invite the band to come on up while I'm telling this story. Some of you remember my Aunt Ninny. She was 94 years old, right? My Aunt Ninny, my wife and I moved in with Aunt Ninny because her daughter, Mary Ellen McCain, she was Marilyn Davis, she became Marilyn McCain. She was 79 years old, and she got remarried at 79. And so my aunt needed someone to live with her. She was 94, and we moved in with Aunt Ninny, and she was this wonderful little woman who never got a car, never drove, always rode with people. And I always was worried about this. I always wondered, why is it that you'll ride with people? She said, I would never drive a car. Most people in a car don't even know what they're doing, and they're trying to navigate this steel box that could kill people, and they're navigating in a narrow lane, and nobody's paying attention. And this was before, of course, cell phones, right? So I'd say, well, Aunt Ninny, why is it then you're willing to ride with somebody who drives that? And that's when I realized what a backseat driver she was, because she had mastered this skill of telling others how to drive. But Aunt Ninny had this wonderful thing. She'd always say, come grow old with me, the best is yet to be. And then she'd always snap back and say, whoever said that never lived to be 94 years old. But she would take and she would walk down to the end of I believe it was Colonial Country Club Court, turn on Colonial Drive, disappear, walk a mile to the bus stop, ride down to Stripling's downtown. Some of you might remember where Stripling's was downtown. She'd take the escalator downstairs, get 2 boxes of candy, ride back up, backed on the bus. That's all she did. Came back. It took a couple of hours for this thing to happen. Why 2 boxes, we asked her once. One was for the next week or so worth of supper, because she ate candy, drank milk, and that was pretty much her supper. The other was because she shared it on the way home on the bus. She just gave the chocolates away. Her daughter was the complete opposite. Mary Ellen Davis was one of the meanest, prejudiced, racist, angry people I'd ever known. But growing up with her was so much fun because she had the most exceptional belly laugh, that if we could get her laughing, she would just start rolling, and the rest of us couldn't stop laughing at her infectious laugh. But if you got her going on something, she had nothing positive to say about it. I once remembered running into somebody at a conference in Minnesota years ago. My Aunt Ninny my Aunt Mary Ellen had married and remarried, and she was living out in the Pampa area of Texas. Turns out this presenter who was at this Minnesota conference was from Pampa, Texas, but didn't know my aunt. I said, you probably wouldn't know her. I mean, Pampa's got 10,000 people or so, but you probably still wouldn't know her. And she said, well, I might. And I said, no, honestly, you wouldn't want to know her because she's kind of mean-spirited. And she said, Mary Ellen McCain? She had a reputation. And as she was getting older and as she was dying, now Stan is here, and my brother Michael, my brother and Stan are partners, and Michael spent so much time with Aunt Mary Ellen. He really took a lot of care of her, and Stan was probably there for some of that as well. And in her final days and her final weeks and whatnot, she was in the hospital. I think she was mostly living off of gin and candy herself. I mean, she just was a bitter spirit. She just was. It was difficult to be around. And I had to go visit her. Michael wasn't there that week and hadn't been a while, and she'd been in the hospital, and I thought, well, maybe I need to visit her, but I thought, how am I going to approach her? I mean, she really could be pretty mean. And I just decided to try something different, to just see if I couldn't be present in a different way, maybe create something else. And so I took my ukulele and I put on a collar. But she knew I was a minister. Years and years earlier, when she hadn't gotten really ill, she used to talk about she would love to have seen me at First Presbyterian, because that's where she and Aunt Ninny went to church when she went. She would love to see Linda and I there. And so I put on a collar. And when I showed up, of course, I didn't know exactly what room she was in, but I had got to the top, to the hospital floor, and it didn't take long because I looked down one of the hall, and there was this crowd of about 6 or 7 nurses, nurse aide, medical staff, and they were all bustling around one of these medical carts, and they were all pointing angrily to a room at the hospital, one of the rooms, and I thought, well, that's where my Aunt Mary Ellen is. And so I went down there, and sure enough, they said, are you a relative of Mary Ellen McCain's? And I said, well, yeah, I'm one of her great-nephews. And they said, well, good. Did you come to perform an exorcism? And I said, no, I just really came to maybe sing a song. And they just kind of looked at me and said, whatever. And so I took it in there. And I'm not going to tell you what Aunt Mary Ellen said to me because I can't repeat it in public. But as I walked in and she saw the collar, basically she said, oh my God, you're not going to pray for me, are you? And I smiled and I said, no, I'm going to sing for you. And she said, oh, well, Jesus. And then she said a whole bunch of other stuff. But I didn't play a song. Now, my Aunt Mary Ellen loved gathering with family and friends. We loved gathering at the house on Christmas time with my uncles, and they all sang songs, and she loved it too. And I thought maybe this would break some kind of the shell. And so I started singing. I sang a very rude, crude, socially unacceptable song that I learned in Scotland when I was at the International Fringe Festival. And it so took her by surprise, she just stared at me and didn't say a word. But as I continued to add these bizarre verses that this song includes, she began to kind of crack a smile. You could almost see a bit of a sparkle in her eye. And she let out a surprising, spontaneous one of those belly laughs. And I just kind of smiled and didn't want to push my luck, so I just kept on with the song. And a couple of the nurses had come in and listened. We were all kind of laughing. And afterwards, she had actually taken the pill, hadn't even given a second thought. She'd taken the medicine and taken the sleep aid, and it was peaceful. And the nursing staff afterwards was like, thank you so much. Can you come back tomorrow morning? And I was like, I didn't. And the next day, honestly, I'm sure she was back to being much of how she'd always been. But something changed. Do you know what changed? The nursing staff didn't see her the same way that they used to, because all they saw was a difficult, belligerent patient that they couldn't seem to get to cooperate with their way of doing things. And sure, frustrating as all get out. Now they saw that she laughed. Now they saw that she had family. Now they saw a different picture entirely. It did not take that much to transform the world around that room. All it took was a little Sabbath time, a little opportunity to mindfully take note. And we can do that in every encounter we have. Even as I spoke of white supremacy or Muslims and jihadists, or I mentioned sexual harassment, even as I bring up these things, some of us are repelling, others of us want to jump on a bandwagon. We react at opposite ends out of mindlessness. But by taking a chance, by practicing Sabbath time in all of our moments, go ahead, take a day off, get some rest. That's not really Sabbath. Sabbath challenges the prevailing culture of destruction. Always. Sabbath is about connecting to God. It challenges the prevailing culture of destruction.